Um, Next slide, please. Next slide. So these are the countries' flags. Very colorful. Next slide. Okay, this one is very informative as well as instructive. You'll notice that the countries are listed by population based on 2022 census, and the total population is 18 million. And on the right-hand column, what I did was I put the percentage of Indian origin people in respect to each one of those countries. You'll notice that they're significantly less than 1 or 2%, except for Guyana, which is 39%, and Suriname 27, and Trinidad and Tobago 35. A total of 6% of the total of 18 million. And note that out of the 18 million, Haiti, which is 11.5 million, skews the whole percentage. If we were to take out Haiti, that number of 6% will increase radically. So let's go to the next slide. Recent actions taken by CARICOM. We note that CARICOM's support of Guyana election results in 2020, which was significant. CARICOM Reparations Committee, which we will talk about later. CARIFESTA, which is a Caribbean Festival of Arts, and condemnation of atrocities in Gaza, as well as the establishment of the Development Bank, the Court of Justice, Disaster Emergency, Catastrophic Risk Insurance, and Examination Council. Next. You'll note in the previous, it's shared interests with a singular voice. Let's talk about the Reparations Committee because this one has some significance to us as Indo-Caribbean community. The, the Reparations Committee was set up primarily, I think, singularly to address the transatlantic slave trade and radicalized system of slavery with the view of obtaining some kind of reparations. But if you go down the line, I've highlighted a few of these things, and you'll notice that under advocacy, it's restricted or encompassing enslavement of Africans, justice for victims of slavery, and the victims of slavery and their descendants. We agree, slavery was abhorrent, inhuman, and a very sad time in the history of the world, and especially in the Caribbean. Slavery was abhorrent, as I said, and reparations are due. What form it takes is not something easily agreed upon. It has to be debated and discussed, and that's why the commission was set up, we hope. But the CARICOM Reparations Committee does not, but should include Indian indentureship in the CRC reparations agenda and dialogue. In fact, one previous session on this forum, I raised the issue with the CARICOM representative, and she promised, I don't remember her name, Dr. Kumar will remember, and she promised to include indentureship as part of the commission's agenda, but I didn't hear anything further beyond that, so I assume that it is dropped. Next slide. Next slide. Next. Oh, going back to the previous one. If you look at there, you'll see the members of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. It does not include anyone of Indian origin, Indo-Caribbean origin. Next. So my concerns going through the limited knowledge I have of CARICOM and what it's been doing is one, the rules and regulations potentially diminish individual countries' sovereignty. And we have to learn from the comparison to the EU, European Union, and the decisions taken in Brussels supersede individual countries' laws and regulations. So it could diminish sovereignty. The second is CARICOM migration patterns affecting demographics and political stability. If we were to follow some of the trends, then migration would be imposed on the countries that least want it, and it may affect the political stability because the percentages will change. The third is the agenda neglecting or marginalizing Indo-Caribbean heritage and culture. I see CARIFESTA being highlighted, but I don't see much of that, including some of the Indian Caribbean heritage, festivals, culture, and participation. On the CARICOM executives, the staff are not inclusive in Indo-Caribbean. I pointed out one picture there with the commission, reparations commission. So I would like to see some of that change to reflect more of the Indo-Caribbean participation. And as I said previously, the reparations committee agenda is not inclusive of Indian indentureship, which it should, because next to slavery, it was close to bondage. And the third thing that CARICOM is not actively engaging the Indo-Caribbean groups or organizations. How many Indo-Caribbean groups do we know or organizations are partners with CARICOM or are engaged with CARICOM? So next slide, please. My conclusion as follows. CARICOM should acknowledge and include Indian heritage, history, and culture because we're part and parcel of the same regional history. CARICOM, and by the way, we contribute quite substantially to the success of these countries in the region. CARICOM should add Indian origin representation on its executive board and staff. CARICOM should add Indian origin representation on the reparations committee. And the CARICOM should include Indian indentureship on its missions in mission of the reparations committee. And that's not there now. The CARICOM should establish partnership, as I said, with Indo-Caribbean organizations, and cultural events should include heritage, Indian heritage, history, and culture. And that's it. I conclude there, and I thank you for your time. Any questions or discussions can be handled later if time permits. Thank you.
And a very, very enlightening presentation, Ashok. Thank you very much. You've highlighted all the deficiencies in CARICOM and show that it is indeed not equitable. If you don't mind, so to members of the audience, please take note and we will get back to you. I'd like to introduce our second speaker now, and this is Dr. Manorma Supnandan of Suriname. She's the former ambassador to CARICOM and past Deputy Secretary General at the CARICOM Secretariat. She's also a past member in several regional, such as CARICOM, and UN commissions, such as the UNDP and the United Nations. Welcome, ma'am. You can go ahead with your presentation for 15 minutes.
Thank you very much. Very good afternoon. Thank you for having me in this session. And of course, to my fellow citizens from Suriname, I would like to say goedemiddag. And to the rest of the family, good afternoon, namaskar, salam alaikum. It's an honor to be in this session again. If we could go to the slides, please. Okay. Let us start here with this slide. You can see it's a bridge, and it looks like we're far ahead to the end point, and we don't see anyone there, right? I purposefully chose this picture to because I'm hearing a lot about CARICOM, but we are forgetting that all of us are part of CARICOM. It's the Caribbean community. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay. Now, who take decisions within the CARICOM in the community? The decisions are taken by our heads of government, the presidents, the prime ministers, at the ministerial level. And then we have the CARICOM secretariat. We're talking about, inclusion of our societies and so on. So when it comes to funding and regional institutions and funding from international partners, that is where the CARICOM secretariat comes in. And then, of course, you also have on a bilateral basis funding agencies, partners who work directly with member states and NGOs. And there, especially, you have the individual NGOs that play a direct and important role. Can we go to the next one, please? Okay. So who and what is CARICOM? I purposefully would like now to go to the next slide. So another one, there's another one. Next one. Okay, stop here, please. Stop here. Good. As I mentioned, all of us, we are CARICOM citizens. And I even mentioned the name of Dr. Harat Singh because he was the chair of the Competition Commission. And he is also in several CARICOM negotiating sessions and meetings and so on. Same goes for me. Same goes for all our politicians who are representing our member states in these ministerial councils and also in the working committees. So what is being reflected in the work of CARICOM is actually a reflection of what is happening internally in our member states. Mention is made, for example, agriculture, fisheries. When you look at the ministers in leading these ministries are normally, usually, what you see are what you call Indo-Caribbean people. When we look at CARIFESTA is also reflecting what are priorities in our member states. It's the ministries responsible for culture, or for sports, some have it in education, who then deal with CARIFESTA. So internally, at the member state level, priorities need to be set, and we have to influence our politicians who represent us to have a correct reflection of what's going on in the region in our individual member states. With those policies, and once those policies are agreed, the CARICOM Secretariat has nothing else to do than to implement those policies. I'll give you an example what happened with the Caribbean Court of Justice. From the very start, and it was a very sensitive issue, but I will mention it. The Indo-Caribbean groups that but we cannot internalize CCJ because when you look at it, it's not reflecting what is really in our region, the composition of our people. You don't see that reflected in CCJ. Later on, it was changed. But from the very beginning, that was not the case. Although the then Attorney General from Trinidad and Tobago was a very crucial person. He was really at the core of establishing CCJ. But once it was established, okay, it seems like, yeah, well, I don't know, our politicians or who they forgot and they did not say that, okay, listen, this is our region, this is the composition, and we need to visualize what is really in our region when it comes to the peoples that we have. So to a certain extent, Mr. Ramsaran is correct. We do not see in all the institutions the face of this group, but there are also other groups, right? You have for example, I'm taking Suriname. We have, when you talk about minorities, our constitution, we don't have minorities. Okay, when you mention the number, this 27.4%, you see that as a minority, but then we have the descendants from the Japanese in Suriname. We have the Chinese. We have the descendants from the Maroons and the interior, 5 groups. So when you start to go that route, There are so many minority groups in the region and in member states. So those are some of the things that we have to consider. Another clear example I can give you, I was in a certain council, and one country's rep at the highest level was always not in the meetings. And once I asked the person, I said, but why? He says, because, and the way he mentioned it is that the people who are there are not our people. Okay, so it becomes very sensitive. And these are some of the issues, some of the realities on the ground that at the highest level, our politicians, in the end, they are the ones who take the decisions. They are the ones who give the instructions. So we have to massage our politicians in the individual member states so that when they go and take decisions at the regional level, they are the ones then who can give certain directions. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. I mentioned this already. To the next one. CARIFESTA and other regional cultural events. Well, the same issue we have there. In member states, you have individual groups, and they need to be more vigilant and involved. There are many opportunities, and we have to use those opportunities to let people hear the voices. You have so many training programs, workshops, funding. You also have the group of the youth ambassadors. They are getting a lot of funding, a lot of training, but the issue is, who do they represent? How are they chosen? Again, it's happening at the member state level. So within member states, that reflection needs to take place. Otherwise, you will not have it at the regional level. So it's the member states level first, and that will be then going to the regional level. And the same goes for participation in trade shows, trade exhibitions. I really would like to urge, not to wait for governments, but to be proactive. Through the chambers of commerce, through private sector, there is a regional private sector organization, right? Through those institutions that people who feel left out, groups who feel left out, that they do some massaging within the member states. Let the voices be heard so that at the regional level, certain policies can be taken. Can we go to the next slide? Youth and student programs, leadership and development. How we work is, it's very difficult. I'm taking now the CARICOM Secretariat's perspective because I was in the CARICOM Secretariat. It's very difficult for the CARICOM Secretariat to go and target, and I'm going to use this example, the Indo-Caribbean group, or the Afro-Caribbean group, or the Chinese Caribbean group, or the Indian Caribbean group. It's very difficult because the technical people cannot work and go on their own way. You get the instructions, you have the programs, you get the funding, and that's how you go in member states. Member states come with what they need within the member state. Okay, so there is where we have to ensure that all the stakeholders are involved, or at least the program reflects the composition of the groups in the country. That is very important. Because if that is not the case, we will complain, but the CARICOM Secretariat on its own cannot do anything. They are just supporting. They cannot go and tell Trinidad and Tobago or Suriname, listen, we're coming with a program, but you make sure that you have the Indo-Caribbean group in it. You make sure you have the Chinese Caribbean group. That's not how it works. It's very, very difficult. Because tomorrow you also don't want people pointing fingers at the CARICOM Secretariat. Because the Secretariat is just executing, implementing. And I think I really want to make that distinction. So, however, let me give you another example when it comes to gender or violence and so on. when you develop certain programs to target certain regions in countries, it is evident that all the groups in those regions will be involved. You cannot exclude people. But if you want to specifically have programs for only the Indo-Caribbean group, or only the Chinese Caribbean group, I don't know how you're going to be doing that, because the problem is also that the secretariat is run by taxpayers' money. So, I mean, you have to serve the region. You need and you must serve the region. You cannot make distinctions there. So that is going to be difficult. And that's why I'm saying it is very important that certain policies are made at the national level. And when you have agriculture or fisheries project, when you go to Guyana or you come to Suriname, the people who are mostly involved are the Indo-Caribbean group. So when you have the programs, when you have the funding projects, etc., these are the people who are really benefiting from it. Okay, can we go to the next one, please? So what are the weak areas? And there are some issues mentioned by Dr. Ramsaran, which are very crucial, and I fully agree with it. And I'll come to it quickly. Citizens should be able to see themselves in the regional developments, the products. They should be able to identify themselves with what is going on at several levels. But on the other hand, in sending out information, communication, messages, and visualizing these, the region's composition of groups of people should be reflected. And a lot of work needs to be done at this level. Advertisements, flyers, leaflets, messages coming from the community should be visualized, presented with the multicultural composition in mind. And the peculiarities of the different groups should also be considered when dealing with issues. I'm talking about like just a few examples: domestic violence, educational dropouts, etc. Next slide, please. Conclusion. Representation is member state driven. Internal structure and political developments mirror the CARICOM and its regional organizations and institutions. CARICOM citizens need to be more vigilant, involved in the regional process so that they can identify themselves with the regional development. Each CARICOM citizen is an integral part of the CARICOM community. And bearing in mind that the CARICOM Secretariat and individual member state representatives, be it at the heads or ministerial level, are being paid from taxpayers' monies, contributions, which means you have to represent all the groups in your country. You're not only getting your salary from one group, you're getting your salary from all the people in the region. And the contributions going to the CARICOM Secretariat comes from all the people. So people have to ensure, our politicians have to ensure that whatever policy is being taken, it should reflect, it should benefit all the groups, all the stakeholders in our member states, so that they serve the whole community, not only one group. And again, there are some ways that you can put special focus on disadvantaged group through funding, training, etc. So this is my contribution. And if there are questions, then I would like to hear this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suknandan. Another very, very enlightening presentation, on point in several areas. And again, we will take your questions at the end. Let's just bring on our third speaker now, and this is Dr. Kusha Haraksingh of Trinidad and Tobago. He's a former CARICOM and CARIForum lead negotiator and past commissioner and chairman of the CARICOM Competition Commission and member of several CARICOM lobbying missions. Welcome, Dr. Haraksingh. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Shalima, and good afternoon or morning, as the case might be, to all those who are on this program. When I was asked to take part in this seminar or this session, I was sent a series of questions, which reminded me of what happened to President Biden, who, when he was appearing for an interview, sent the questions he would like to be asked to the interviewee. This is probably a new way of doing interviews. But anyway, I looked at the questions, and basically I see the questions asking, well, what is it that CARICOM can do for the East Indian community? And in answering this question, I will do 5 things. I will, first of all, suggest that the questions which were sent were misconceived. Secondly, I will say that there is a case for interrogating CARICOM, but not necessarily from an East Indian perspective, but from a general perspective. Thirdly, I think this shows the spotlight on the nature of Caribbean institutions as a whole, and not only CARICOM. And fourthly, I will suggest that a real interrogation should be over the idea of the Caribbean. What is the Caribbean? And finally, I'm going to argue that the questioning should be overturned, and our real concern should be not with what CARICOM can do for the Indian community, but what the Indian community can do to make its presence more felt in CARICOM, and to move the whole discussion then away from what I call victimhood to what I would call agency. In a sense, this is what the previous speaker, Ambassador Manarandam, was saying. And indeed, I should begin by saying what a privilege it is to be appearing with her on this platform. I have had the privilege of being with her in many meetings in CARICOM, where very often we were about the only 2 persons of East Indian ethnicity in the room. So there are some awkward moments, some ideas of marginalization, but I don't think any of that worked against us. Indeed, I can attest to the great sense of respect and admiration that the room as a whole would have had for Ambassador Subnandan, for her leadership, for her participation, and for the way in which she conducted herself. There was a great deal of admiration, and I don't think that there was any kind of barrier either from the question of gender or from the question of ethnicity. Indeed, her whole career makes my argument a little bit easier, that what we need to do is not ask what CARICOM can do for you, but what we can do to impress ourselves and our presence in CARICOM. This is not to say, of course, that there are no awkward moments. There are no moments that impress upon us the sense of marginalization. And I will explain some of these things from my own personal experiences to show how it works. So, for example, at a very crucial meeting of one of the CARICOM councils, a minister from one of the smaller CARICOM member states, aware that there were very crucial decisions to be made. And he felt that we should derive some inspiration from religion. And he asked for permission to begin the meeting with a prayer. Of course, nobody would object to that, and he did deliver a prayer. But naturally, coming from one of those islands, the prayer was entirely Christian. I had to explain to him afterwards that we here in Trinidad have a prayer, as for example, when I was a member of parliament, which never ended with the words, through Jesus Christ our Lord, amen, and was a kind of inclusive prayer that everybody could relate to. A similar thing happened when I was present at the swearing in of one of the presidents of the Caribbean Court of Justice in St. Kitts. The speaker, one of the speakers, was his personal pastor, who said that he was sure that the new president of the court would be guided by the spirit of the good book. And I had to explain to him afterwards that in the Caribbean, there were many good books and not just one. That was kind of awkward because the person who was master of ceremonies for that event was the CARICOM lawyer, who was a Muslim and who was on the stage wearing a hijab, so her headdress. So that sense of marginalization was present even when such a person was present on the podium. So yes, there are these awkward situations that spring from marginalization, but I wouldn't say that it's deliberate. I wouldn't say that there is any mischievousness. And as I said earlier, I think Ambassador Suknandan's career would show how it is possible and how there are no real barriers that need to be overcome. Now, the first point, why I think the questions are misconceived, is related to something that the ambassador said, which is that CARICOM is a member-driven organization. When I was a negotiator for CARICOM, there was nothing I could do or say at the table that was not agreed to by all of the member states. It was sometimes very difficult, but I could not present an argument to my interlocutor across the table from Canada or from the European Union unless I had the backing of all of the member states. They are the ones who made the decision. So CARICOM is a member-driven organization. And as the ambassador said, if you want to present a point of view, if you have to make an argument, you will first have to drive that argument through your respective member states. So one of the questions asked, how could we have a greater representation in the council, the CARICOM Council? Well, if you look at the constitution of CARICOM, the council is composed of representatives from member states. There's nothing that CARICOM can do. The member states will have to send a representative to the meeting to reflect what that member state would like to see at the meeting. So this is an extremely important point. It is a question of member-driven, being member-driven. Similar, as the ambassador explained, would go for things like participation in trade shows or participation in cultural events. And this is not to say that there are no occasions or avenues available for member states and the representatives of member states to have a kind of representation that reflects the business community or the Indian community in various ways. In one of my examples, when we were negotiating the successor to the Cotonou Agreement, and we were concerned about what were called the protocol commodities, which happened to be rum, sugar, rice, and bananas. I was part of the group in which I was the representative for sugar. The representative for rice was an Indian businessman from Guyana. The representative for rum was an Indian businessman from Guyana. The representative for Barbados was a Jamaican who was not Indian. But there was nothing to prevent us from so-called participating in this group as Indians. Now, I do have to say that you should not take the view, or you should not assume that if somebody is an Indian in one of these councils, that they will necessarily represent the Indian point of view. They may have to represent their national point of view. And sometimes people can indeed be mistaken by making that easy assumption, as indeed happened in the American Supreme Court when a Black judge, Clarence Thomas, was appointed, hopefully to represent the Black point of view. And people have discovered by experience, by his judgments, that that is not necessarily the case. So being Indian does not exactly ensure that the Indian view, if there's such a thing, will be represented. I had another important personal experience about this that I'll just share with you. I was representing the CARICOM sugar industry in a case at the WTO. The case was about export subsidies. I was an Indian representing the Caribbean. My colleague from Fiji was an Indian representing Fiji. My colleague from Mauritius was an Indian representing Mauritius. And at the table, we were arguing for these export subsidies. But the country that was totally against export subsidies was India. And the representative arguing against that was, of course, an Indian. So there's no easy way around these things. We have positions, and the positions may or may not coincide with what you want to represent as an Indian. So that's my first point. The nature of CARICOM as a regional organization is exactly what the ambassador said. It's a member-driven organization. And if we have problems, we have to address it at the member level. We have to make sure that the representatives that come from the members, are chosen by the members, reflect adequately what we would like to see. So that's the first point. The second point is, I'm not going to expand too much on this, but I said that I think the real question should be interrogating CARICOM as a whole. What is it and what is it doing? CARICOM was in a way founded by a kind of example or kind of teaching from the European Union, which itself began to question the idea of regional organizations, as we've seen with the question of Brexit. And there are good examples now about why that notion, which was once founded in the idea of WTO compatibility, is in fact being questioned more and more. We just had, for example, a regional organization, NATO, meeting in Washington, and there are questions about its relevance and purpose. There are many regional organizations about whom questions are being asked, and we can therefore ask similar questions about CARICOM. As I said, my third point is that the emphasis should really be on Caribbean institutions, how these institutions as a whole kind of reflect, as the ambassador was saying, the population of the region as a whole. I can give a few examples about how things have or have not moved over time, this notion of marginalization in Caribbean institutions. Personally, when I went as a student to the University of the West Indies in the 1960s, it was at a time when the university was still under the influence of English universities. We all had to sit for formal dinners 5 days a week, and we had to eat these dinners. And there was no sense in these dinners that the menu would reflect someone who was Indian or someone who was Hindu. We generally had a choice, except on Wednesdays. The choice was between beef and pork. And I wouldn't say what I chose, but I would say that we led a delegation to the warden to try to make some kind of adjustment for Hindus in particular. And he did try, but in the end he said that the domestic buzzer told him that the food had been sort of bought in bulk, so there wasn't much that he could do. One of my colleagues who was studying medicine eventually dropped out and went to India, where he completed his studies. So that was 1960s. At the same time, I was aspiring to be an actor of some kind, and I went to audition for a part in a dramatic play based on Samuel Selvon's novel, The Lonely Londoners. And the part I was reading for was one of his Indian characters, and I was not chosen. In fact, a colleague of mine who was African from Trinidad was chosen. I went to the dramatist to ask the question, why was I not chosen? This was a big Caribbean intellectual. And he said to me that I was not chosen because I did not sound Indian. But what he was actually saying is he had no idea, this Jamaican dramatist, how an Indian from Trinidad sounded, because his sense of what was Caribbean was totally different. So that's just a personal example of, I would say, the marginalization question. And it didn't only happen to me, it happened to other people too. You know that if you couldn't eat the food in these dining clubs that universities were, what is likely to happen to you? It happened to the great Indian mathematician called Ramanujan, who went to Cambridge, could not eat the food, just as I couldn't eat the food in Jamaica. And he instead decided to heat his tin of baked beans on the paraffin heater in the room, and eventually died from lead poisoning at a very early age. So there were some difficulties in how you adjust and how you tackle the question of marginalization. A few years later, in the same UWI, I got a query from a lecturer from Barbados, the head of a department, who wanted to know if it was true that one of his staff members, whose father had died in Trinidad and who had applied for leave to attend his funeral celebrations, was not pulling a fast one by asking not for 2 days leave, but for asking for 10 days leave, because he was telling his colleague in Barbados that Hindu funeral ceremonies last for 10 days. And there was no way that that lecturer, head of department from Barbados, knew or was aware or wanted to make the adjustment. So, in fact, I'll give you one further example from my personal example. Going to school in Jamaica, a lecturer once told me, but you know, when I give you an A for your essay, I don't see any sense of excitement. You just take it as coolly as anything. You don't show any great excitement. And I could not explain to him that as far as some Indians are concerned, we do not show that kind of excitement. That, well, as you know, as we say, happiness and sadness are two sides of the same coin. And we are trained not to go overboard or to be exuberant or to show that sense of excitement. And indeed, this came to haunt me many years later when he wrote a recommendation for me. And in the recommendation, he said, I wish he would be more obtrusive, he would be more excited, he would, instead of being so calm and cool and collected. So these are things about marginalization, about people not understanding. And I can't say it's only non-Indians who do not understand. A lot of Indians themselves do not understand because they think they do when they do not. Which reminds me of something that V.S. Naipaul once said in one of his books. He was explaining how he was appearing for his exams in school, and he was studying very hard. But he had a cousin who was also appearing for exams. He was going to write the London University exam in Hindi, and he was not studying at all. And when Naipaul asked him, well, why are you not studying? He said, well, I'm Indian and I'm training to be a pundit anyway, so I will pass this exam. Well, he promptly failed, according to Naipaul. So you might think you know, but you don't exactly know. So marginalization is a question, and this question affects how Caribbean institutions work or do not work. For example, I'll give another example. When I was teaching law in Trinidad, I was teaching jurisprudence, and we had reached a point where we had decided that we'd ask the same question or set the same question paper for all of UWI, Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad. I'm teaching jurisprudence, and I'm trying to explain in this jurisprudence that this is not only English, but I'm talking about Hindi jurisprudence, I'm talking about Islamic jurisprudence, and I set a question on those things, only to be told by the lecturer from Barbados that we can't have this in the question paper because there was no way his students could understand those questions. Now, that lecturer eventually became a judge in Trinidad. So it leaves me to wonder when he is judging on the bench, whether he will take into account at all what is part of the thinking or learning of jurisprudence from these quarters. He knows the law very well, but whether he knows the philosophy behind the laws would be a question to be asked. And so I remember today, for example, reading one of the Indian newspapers that there is a big query over whether in teaching jurisprudence in Delhi University, the Indian textbook, the Manusmriti, which is the textbook on law from the laws of Manu, should indeed be part of the syllabus. And there's a big debate going on now, and Delhi University just decided that it would not be part of the syllabus because that text is not a text that shows Hinduism in a good light. So there are difficulties not only among non-Indians, but also among Indians themselves. And finally, on this, I could just tell you two other things that shows the problem. Today, there's an advertisement in newspapers for a judge from the CCJ, a judge of the CCJ, the Caribbean Court of Justice. And the qualifications asked for are firstly, high moral character. Well, there's no definition of what that is. And we already know from Trinidad, or as Mahatma Gandhi used to say, one man's moral can be another man's meat when he was talking about the holy cow. So there's a great deal of vagueness about what is high moral character. And secondly, the advertisement says the person must have an understanding of people and society. Now, let's suppose this is somebody from St. Kitts or Antigua. I don't know what understanding they will really have of people and society in Guyana or Suriname or Trinidad. So those are kinds of issues that we sometimes face, and I'll end that personal example of issues by referring to, I was talking about Caribbean institutions, but let's look at the Caribbean cricket team. And I remember the manager of the team, the current manager, who was treated, he's playing cricket in India, he was treated with great appreciation, embraced, hugged, admired, and so on. But he suddenly discovered that what he was called by his Indian friends in India, he was called Kalu, and he discovered from a stand-up comedian in America that Kalu means black. And all of a sudden, he begins to argue that he was being discriminated against in India. In other words, taking the American idea of black, transposing it to India, and thinking that that was the same thing. And he is representing the Caribbean, the West Indies cricket team. And he had spent many years in India, where, as I said, he was embraced, revered, he was adored, he was hugged up by his players, by his co-players, and suddenly discovering that, well, they were discriminated against him because they're calling him black. So this is what I mean by the idea of the Caribbean, which was my fourth point. What is this idea of the Caribbean? And what is the Caribbean? Now, I have had the experience of dealing with serious Caribbean thinkers, the important, eminent ones, New World thinkers, like Walter Rodney from Guyana, who once said to me that Indians should really consider themselves black. And when I asked him why, he said, well, you're either black or white. And when I said to him, but you are trying to find space for your own definition, why don't you accord to Indians that privilege of finding their own definition? The answer was, well, this is the Caribbean, and we are supposed to be a Caribbean people. It's the same thing that Lloyd Best once told me, because I got into an argument with him once, and I have written about this. When I came back from England, he approached me to buy a ticket for a fundraising venture on a public holiday in Trinidad that was Diwali Day. And the fundraising venture was a barbecue, pork barbecue fundraising for Diwali Day. And I had to explain to him that there was no way he was thinking about me, because there was no way I was going to come to a pork barbecue on Diwali Day. And he didn't see the problem. He didn't see the idea of marginalization and why he was thinking in the way he was thinking. And he was aspiring to be a national leader. And similarly, we had notions from that great Caribbean thinker who was Vice Chancellor of the university, Rex Nettleford, who once said that Indians in the Caribbean must show their appreciation to the Black people who fought slavery and therefore made the Caribbean a free space, and that we must show our appreciation by a willingness to embrace our African heritage in the Caribbean. David Lowenthal, a famous sociologist writing about Suriname, had said that people always ask the question why Indians should not be more like Blacks, but never ask the question, why can't Blacks be somewhat like Indians? So this is an important issue which even the famous Nobel Prize winner Derek Walcott took a long time to understand. Because in his Nobel Prize winning speech, he did say, I've lived in Trinidad for so long, and I never understood that this was a place where you can see the big drama of the Ram Leela in the plain fields of Felicity in Trinidad. And it took him a long time to understand that that was also part of the Caribbean. And it's because he knows about the French-speaking West Indian, he knows that there's a fourth or fifth eye in Martinique and Guadeloupe that's known as Indianite, which is an appreciation of the Indian heritage. So marginalization then, and fighting that marginalization is important. Which brings me to my final point about moving from victimhood to agency, asking not so much what CARICOM can do for the East Indian community, but what the East Indian community can do to make the promise and the reality of this region a region in which diversity is accepted and celebrated, and in which the watchword should not actually be tolerance, because it's not a question of tolerating anything, but really a question of celebrating the rich diversity that we have, which indeed is the diversity of the modern world, and which is one of the big ideas that we here in CARICOM can preach to the rest of the world. And we can also show, as Ambassador Supnandan's career has shown, that it is not special treatment that is required, but an appreciation of merit, of perseverance, and of one's own qualities that will drive us forward in this region. So thank you very much for listening to me. And of course, as usual, I'll be free to answer any question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harak Singh. You've brought a unique perspective to the topic, and we really appreciate you sharing from your personal experiences with us. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll ask you again, please take note of your questions. We will give you an opportunity to ask them at the end of the next presentation. And I would like to bring on Dr. Indira Rampasad. She's also from Trinidad and Tobago. She is the head of Department of Political Science, and she's a lecturer in political science and international relations at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine. She's a former election observer for the Organization of American States, the OAS, in Grenada, El Salvador, and Guyana. Welcome, Dr. Rampasad. Can you unmute your mic, please?
I just did. So good afternoon, good day, good evening, good night, wherever you may be, members of the Indian diaspora. I see we have 40 participants. I suppose that include the speakers. Can you all hear me? Just making sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Shalima. Thank you very much to the ICC again for allowing me to contribute to this conversation. I think it is an important one, whatever we may think or whatever views we may hold. I think it's very important that we share those perspectives. We do not have another Indian forum like this. I don't know of any in the Caribbean where these kinds of views are shared across the diaspora. And I say the diaspora, meaning even outside of the Caribbean diaspora. So we have members from South Africa here. I know we have people from India who join us from time to time, different parts of the Indian, of the diaspora. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the composition of CARICOM's population, CARICOM's expressed stated goals, and the realization of these goals and outcome. And then I'm going to take the debate that was going on with the other three people, which I had no clue about, but which I myself decided to include to the higher theoretical academic level, because it offers explanations. It offers explanations, perhaps a little more clearly, of some of the issues that were raised here today. So the composition of CARICOM's population, now they say that it's this is in their website. It's okay, so they talk about the ethnicities: Indigenous peoples, Africans, Indians, Europeans, Chinese, and Portuguese. And I'm sure there are all kinds of mixtures of those and probably some others that are not identified. They did refer to the East Indians, and they gave a little history here of the East Indians that were brought to the Caribbean mentorship. But they never gave a figure on how many East Indians are there in CARICOM. Now we're talking about CARICOM and not Caribbean here. So there's a distinction because we have the English, French, Dutch, Spanish, Caribbean, and CARICOM includes Suriname, which is a Dutch-speaking country. It also includes Guadeloupe and Martinique. But I have here identified only CARICOM, not the English-speaking CARICOM. And Martinique and Guadeloupe are not part of CARICOM. Suriname is, all right? So these are the countries of CARICOM, and these are the, this is the ethnic, the numbers of the Indo-Caribbean population in these countries. And we would see that now we are approximately, so it's 964, 144, there may be give and takes, you know, some more, some less. Let's say approximately 1 million Indo-Caribbeans. in the CARICOM territories, not the Caribbean, because as you see, I left out Martinique and Guadeloupe and French Guiana. There were some other countries they listed. Took them out, only included the CARICOM population. There are more in the Caribbean. This is CARICOM. Okay, so this is CARICOM stated goals, and they have always, expressed that they're integrated, they're inclusive, they're resilient. This is in their vision statement. They strive for human rights, social justice. I mean, ideals that we all hold dear: economic, social, and cultural prosperity. And even in their core values, they talk about equity, integrity, and good governance. These are stated in their websites and their mission as well, about social cohesion and human rights. We're seeing these high ideals, good governance, one voice on international issues. Okay, so I myself was in the dilemma Dr. Raxing was in when asked to speak, because I did reach out to Dr. Mahabi and ask him, what do you want me to speak about? Because I recognize that just like Dr. Suknandan, CARICOM, and my major is international relations, so I know this, and that's why I would go into the deep dive just now on the IR of this. CARICOM is represented by member states. Dr. Raxing said it, Suknandan said it. Okay, there is no two ways about that. The member states feed into CARICOM, its policies. There's a heads of government conference, and they make decisions there which are binding. According to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, Article 28.1, they're binding on member states. And this was one of the cases that came to the CCJ, Shanique Myrie and the state of Barbados, and Barbados lost on that point because Barbados wanted to argue that provision was not binding on them, and the CCJ went to town on Barbados on that point. So this issue of so I've identified some of the contentious issues where the Indo-Caribbean population perceive that they're not fairly treated. Now, we can't go for equally, because I'd say 1 million out of 16 million. It is difficult in any country, in any state, in any organization, and to talk about equality. It's the strive for equity, you strive for fairness, you strive for reasonableness. But it is sometimes difficult in policies to strive for equality. Right, now keep in mind again, the member states and their representatives, sometimes it's the ambassador, sometimes it's the foreign affairs minister, sometimes it's the prime minister or the president in the case of Guyana that are representing the state there. So the issue of CARIFESTA was brought to my attention, and there were concerns, and this I took from an article that was sent to me, that there were no artisans, the art and craft of the Indo-Caribbean people were not there. The people were not there. The artisanship and the art were not there. This was a 2017 article. I don't recall what had happened with CARIFESTA 2017, I would tell you, but clearly there were Indo-Trinidadians that were feeling excluded. And the question is, how could they have included themselves? Could they have engaged CARICOM directly? Because CARIFESTA is a CARICOM initiative. It was from Fort Burnham way back. Could they have engaged CARICOM directly? Or is it a contingent from the state, Trinidad and Tobago, that was going to CARICOM, and that state somehow didn't engage the Indo population, or the Indo population didn't engage the state? And this is what Dr. Haraxin is saying, is do we have to engage, or do they have to come to us, or do we have to go to them? So is what we can do or what they can do. And whether it was deliberate to leave out the Indo artists and artisans from CARIFESTA 1917 and thereafter or before. I don't have the answer for that, because that would mean getting into the minds of these people. It would be natural, I would say it will be natural. Whether it's rational is a different thing, but it will be natural for Indians or Indo-Caribbean people looking on to think that they are being excluded, deliberately excluded, or, and we're talking about the average John in the street, and to think that there is a deliberate policy to exclude them. The question we again want to ask is whether that was a state policy or whether it was a CARICOM policy. All right, so we have some of the photos here of early CARICOM, CARIFESTA initiatives. And I want to think that there were some Indians in the audience, but I'm not sure. The pictures are kind of blurred. Those are the 1970s. I don't know, but for what it's worth, I presented them because the question still arises, are they deliberately left out of these celebrations? Now, when I was growing up, and we used to hear cricket on the radio, that time we didn't have TV. And my brother and they, because I'm a real cricket fan myself, because I grew up with it, playing cricket in the yard. I used to play sweaty, that's what the girls used to play. I don't know if you all remember sweaty. We used to hold the bat up and we used to just hit up in the air and they used to catch us. So those were the children's games, and particularly for the girls because it was kind of soft cricket and wind ball, of course. So when we were listening to cricket, when I was growing up, I noticed my brother and they would always be supporting India. So I would say, well, in my childhood, I was very young. How come you all supporting India? We live in Trinidad. And they say, well, look at the team. There were no Indians in the team. Okay, so maybe that happened long, long ago. So I haven't done that research, and Dr. Haraxin will know much better than me. He's a historian and an avid cricket fan as well. So these are the number of Indians that have since been involved in cricket, right? Now we would see 1 or 2 or 3 in the Windies cricket team, but we want to keep in mind that this is some 13 member states. We want to keep in mind that they have to share the spoils around. And we have to keep in mind that we should be happy that we have Indians in the team. So what the Indians do, some of them will tell me that they support the Indians in the team, but they don't support the team. So they support Nicholas Puran and they support Darren Ganga, but they don't support Windies when Windies playing. And if Windies playing against India, they support India. But if Windies playing against some other team, they will support Windies. So it's a very interesting dynamic. This whole Cricket West Indies, which emerged from the West Indies Cricket Board of Control, the organization that controls it. But there was the perception, and I know Dr. Haraxin was involved there, I believe, as an arbitrator, that, there was, and probably this wasn't the issue he was arbitrating on, but that there was a perception that the board had discriminated against Indians of the Caribbean. I cannot prove that. I was in the EUC, and I have to tell you all, proving discrimination is one of the most difficult things to do, because you have to get into the mind and the intention of the person, of the perpetrator, and that is very, very difficult to do. So the issue of the agriculture policy came up. And again, have the Indian population and the Agricultural Society of Trinidad and Tobago engage the government? Can they engage the government as Indians, or do they have to engage the government as a group of agriculturalists, as an interest group? And can they go directly to CARICOM? Okay, so these are some of the questions we want to ask. Do they have to take it to the state, to take it to CARICOM, which is probably more than likely what they have to do? But they have a group, they have a society, and therefore they have to be active and they have to be lobbyists to lobby what they want. But I don't think that they can just take it as an Indian, group of Indian agriculturalists. I don't think they can do that. Dr. Suknananda has explained that these kinds of policies are not done ethnically. So we come now to the vexing question here of reparations, which was raging all week last week, that there were no Indians in the reparations committee. Now, I think that one is a matter of concern, and for 2 reasons. One particular reason is that I believe the agenda before was to include Amerindians, Native Indians, and indentures, East Indian indentures, in that whole movement. But the question arises now. Now I see that has changed. I'm only seeing the Native Indians, the indigenous peoples, and the African slaves. So it was supposed to be a triad, as they say, with these 3 groups being represented. But we want to ask the question, how many Indians? Because I have been talking to people, and I always talk to people when there's some controversy to get a sense. How many Indians in Trinidad are interested in reparations? Because I can tell you, I heard so many criticisms about it. And it is not because Indians are not part of it. It is because that Indians don't need that. Indians don't like to beg. Indians don't like handouts. Indians have succeeded despite everything. And so if they want to fight for it, that's their business, but we don't need to. We have been a successful economic group, social group, and maybe not have, we have not hold the reins of power or politics and the polity have not had as many successes, but they are not seeing the need for this. Now, and I believe that if we can get reparations for some of the atrocities of indentureship, as the Africans have been getting for slavery, and if the Amerindians can get for genocide, then that's great. I would support that if we can get some reparations. And it doesn't have to be cash, it can be in kind. So I don't have a problem with it, my personal view. But I can tell you that there are lots of Indians in the Caribbean that do not support that whole reparation drive. So if you're trying to mobilize and lobby support for it to get in there, whether it is in a national committee where there are no Indians, or whether it is in the regional CARICOM committee where there are no Indians, neither committee have Indians, then you will have to have a very robust lobby. Now, I know there have been a lobby. And I believe Dr. Mahabir has been involved in this lobby, and some of our Guyanese intellectuals have been involved in this lobby. So I would like to hear probably a little more of how far we reach with that and what happens, because the conversation or the discourse has somewhat changed. The rhetoric has changed because it's supposed to have included indentureship, but now I'm seeing in the reconstituted CARICOM National Committee and in the CARICOM 10-point plan that there are no Indians and they're not mentioning indentureship. Okay, so that I think is a point of concern. All right, so this is where I said, you know, they talk about here the persistent race, the descendants of slavery and genocide as a root cause of the suffering and indentureship is left. Now, I'm going to take you quickly to the international relations thesis. So I draw all these diagrams myself to bring it to the level for the students to understand, because it's very hard for them. It's very, very difficult for them to understand theory, international relations, and any theory to start. So I draw this diagram and say, let's imagine this is the world system. And we have all these actors. They're called actors in the world system. And we have states like Trinidad and Tobago and India and the United States and South Africa. And we have the WTO, we have the EU, we have regional blocks, you know, and CARICOM is one of them. So CARICOM is considered a non-state actor. It's a regional bloc, right? It's part of the system. And in this system, what we focus on in IR is the interactions between states. So those arrows there is what we're really focusing on, not inside the state itself, not inside the EU, not inside. We focus on the interactions between states when we are analyzing from this first level, which we call a systemic, the international level, and we say it's an exogenous perspective. We are looking at it from the outside. Then we have the state level. So this is now the type of government, you look in the situation, the type of policy, and the IR scholars claim that this is foreign policy making, really. You look at how the state make foreign policy. And who make foreign policy? Who contribute to policy? The heads of government, the executive, the bureaucracy, that is like ministries, the police service, the legislature, which is the parliament, the political opposition, the interest groups, of which ICC would be one, which is an NGO, and the people, the public opinion, the media, civil society, they all contribute. But they are in order of importance in what is taken into account there. And this is the order of importance. The heads of government and the executive, they are the most potent force. Although it will depend on the policy too, because we can see public opinion and we can see interest groups also having and NGOs having a big role to play in roles like, in issues like climate change and climate justice and stuff like that. Right, so, but what is happening is that so the other level is the individual level. Now, this will depend on the leaders themselves, whether it's Irfan Ali, whether it's Keith Rowley, whether it's Kamala Prasad-Visesa, whether it's Ralph Gonsalves. Well, it depends on the leader, the personality, the personal trait, their background, their worldview, who they are, who their advisors are, whether they want to conform to group behavior, which is called organizational behavior. You know, we want to look at their individual traits, basically, what motivates them, what drives them, what influences them, whether they had a bad experience with somebody, whether they're really not open-minded, whether they're liberal, whether they're conservative. In the US, they would look at those things. So you're looking at their worldview, and you're looking at their political perspectives. And then what I argue is that what we have is intermistic policy, really. All politics, in my mind, are domestic. So it starts there, and it feeds into the regional and the international level, right? It feeds into the human individual is also coming from the domestic arena. The leaders are coming from the domestic arena. The advisors are coming from the domestic arena. And that would feed. So I say that it's a multi-level game. There are theorists that argue that it's a two-level game. Intermistic is a confluence of international and domestic politics. And so you look at, for example, the Cuban American population in Miami and the heavy influence they have on US foreign policy to Cuba, or the Jewish lobby and the heavy influence they have on American policy to Israel, right? And that we know is a raging debate right now with the Israel-Palestine conflict. So we have a number of issues that we need to ask. And Dr. Haraksing identified some of these already. Now, none of the speakers, by the way, collaborate with each other. We don't collaborate with each other when we're doing our presentations, but interestingly, there are overlaps. And I think it's a question of identity. It's a salient issue. Who we are, where are we going? What is CARICOM? What is the Caribbean? And how do we fit the space, that space, our space? What is our space? And how are we to gain the space? What is the process? Is it that we have to take the initiative as Indians in CARICOM, or is it that they have to come to us? So this is a question we want to ask. And where are we going with it? Right? So Dr. Haraksing talked about victimization. We also had blaming and shaming. We have perceptions and misperceptions that, like I said, sometimes the way things look is not how they really are. And as academics, we are expected to delve deeper. We are expected to go do that deep dive and analyze. We're expected to do research. We're expected to do surveys and interviews and, you know, the whole list of methodologies that we have to do to get to the root of it. And then we can give our analysis based on our data collection. So there is certainly a feeling of exclusion and alienation. There is certainly a feeling of marginalization. And we want to ask, is it deliberate or not? Is it real or perceived? And I would end with an anecdote. We've heard many today. So recently, the university, I am the union leader, as you all know, and of WIGAT, and the university called a meeting, University Finance and General Purposes Committee meeting. It's a big university meeting. The meeting was called on May 31st. So they sent out the invitation for the meeting, and I immediately spotted, but this is a holiday. Now, like every Caribbean person, I don't like to give up my holiday to work, right? I catch up with work or I relax on a holiday. You know, this is a day when you want to do your own thing, or you want to catch up on things that you have to do. So it's not only me. You know, this is the Caribbean people. We like our holidays. Trinidad have many, many holidays. Trinidad and Tobago, many, about 16 holidays. So the university administration, they have a portal where they send out to the principals and the registrars to fill in the holidays so they wouldn't schedule big meetings on those days. Now, the holiday was Indian arrival day, the 30th, which was also Corpus Christi, the Thursday. So we had a double holiday. And in Trinidad, we have a precedent, and the government always say when you have a double holiday, you get the other day as a holiday. So the Friday, the 31st was a holiday. But the administration at St. Augustine clearly missed that. And so they didn't put in the 31st as a holiday. So they set this meeting. So I now had to fight, and it was an unnecessary battle for both the Indo-Trinidadians and the Catholics, because now they were given this day so both can celebrate. They didn't say which group for what day, right? Certainly the government wouldn't say which group for what day, but we got the 2 days. And so Indians would have had, you know, go visit their family, whatever, go to the beach. The Catholics may have gone to church still on that day, I don't know. But anyway, the point is that the UE administration made a mistake. I raised it in time, I think ample time, with the university, with the vice chancellor. And there was some concern because some heads of government attend, or their representative attend these meetings as well, that some of them had already agreed to attend, and they were reluctant to change it, but there was time to change it. And then before they had set it on Spiritual Baptist Day, they had set meetings on the 30th of March, and I complained about that. And before they had set it on Corpus Christi. So I wrote the Vice Chancellor, we didn't get the traction, and then went to my executive, and my executive wrote a letter. They said that, you know, we shouldn't be doing this, because even big heads of government there of Trinidad and Tobago would probably feel insulted that you're holding this big meeting on a holiday, an ethnic holiday at that, because both the Catholics and the Indians were celebrating on those days. And we wrote the letter. Eventually, they decided to change it because we explained the feeling and the perception. And of course, this would be more for the university community than for the wider Caribbean. But I suspect that there would have been some repercussions if that had gotten out. Anyway, the point is that it was changed, and all's well that ends well. So what do we do? What do we do? Now, I think that there is a certain level of apathy amongst the Indians and amongst the Trinidadian population, and I think to some extent the Caribbean population, in that they're not robust enough and they're not lobbyist enough, and they don't make bold statements. But your statements have to be reasonable, like I said. But a lot of people, and the Indians themselves, are very much wrapped up in their own lives and their family lives. Many are not interested in domestic issues, nor least, they say foreign policy is way down the ladder in terms of interests. Interests and what people vote on, for example. Foreign policy is way down. It's not salient unless it's a foreign policy issue for a Jew on Israel and Palestine, or for a Cuban American on Cuba, US-Cuba relations, or for an Indo-Trinidadian on India-US relations, something like that. But foreign policy is not big on the agenda. It's way down in terms of what people vote on. So we would consider engaging our governments on issues that affect us. Agriculture, CARICOM, for example. Cricket, of course, has to go to the West Indian Cricket Association there. Should we engage CARICOM? Can we engage CARICOM as an interest group, as an NGO? Some of them have. Some of them do engage regional blocks. And so this is something to explore, whether when you have an issue, you can write to CARICOM, write to the Secretary General and say that, you know, you think that the Indo-Caribbean population should be represented there. With regard to the CCJ, I already explained at length how that process takes place, the Regional and Judicial Legal Services Commission. I don't think you can engage that process. Engage the Indo-Caribbean population. So I don't know how many of them are thinking about these issues, and whether it's salient in their minds, whether they're really concerned about reparations or not, or about CARIFEST. Because a lot of these discourses are driven by an educated middle class, and are very few at that, very, very few at that. So for like members of this group, right? So I think we have to also engage, and this I see as a crisis, and I've said it publicly, we have to engage our youth, the millennials, the Gen Zs, the Generation Alpha, which is the current generation. Because I am seeing as a lecturer at UWI, they're not reading, and they're not involved in nothing. They're not interested, well, I shouldn't exaggerate. They're not interested in many of the issues that are of importance. For them as students of international relations, for example, we hold forums, Vice Chancellor forums on Israel-Palestine. I chaired that forum. And, you know, I invited all my students to come. This is a big international relations issue. They don't show up. See 1 or 2 students there. You know, the people who were interested was the pro-Israelites and the pro-Palestinians. Those people came to the forum, right? So we did have a bit of the academic community there, not enough, I think. So how do you get people to be interested in issues of concern? And how do you get the Indo population, I'm speaking directly to this forum, to get interested in issues that affect them, or that impact them, or that they perceive to be unfair and unreasonable and even discriminatory. So with that, I would like to end. I want to thank you again for this opportunity, and I'm willing to share the field questions.
Excellent, Dr. Rampersad. Thank you very much for a data-driven presentation that raises, again, your unique perspective, but couched in all the important points that we need to raise. Sorry about that echo just now. We have several people with their hands up who would like to ask questions, and I'm going in order. So I'm just going to ask everyone, we have 20 minutes left. Please, let's keep our questions brief so that we have our speaker, we give our speakers an ample opportunity to respond. So let's bring our first question from Mr. Jay Nair. Jay, go ahead, please.
Lots of information from all the presenters today. And I prepared myself. I put on a YouTube video of Dr. Shashi Tharoor. And I'm sure the academics in the forum will know who Dr. Shashi Tharoor is. He still claims that Britain owes India reparations, 400 years of reparations, and he keeps that all the time. And this was his lecture to Oxford University a few years ago. And today he is the politician sitting in government of India and won with a landslide in Tamil Nadu. The problem I'm looking at here is exactly what what you call experience in 1978, 79, 80 in Canada. I came in as a single person, as a minority in the eyes of the people of Canada. Now, all that we want to do is the ICC wants to have a hand in trying to get get involved with CARICOM, because I know how CARICOM was done. I know how CARICOM was formulated, because I came from the labor movement, and we had a lot of involvement with CARICOM, with the AFL-CIO, with ILO, with WTO. And I remember in 1981 convention, I picked out the executive of the Canadian Labour Congress. And I picked them out because there wasn't one person of color on the executive board of the Congress. And yet the membership in the convention hall, 600, 700 of them, there was all kinds of people, the disabled, the indigenous people, and persons of color, and all kinds of races and minorities and so on. So we are not there yet. I know the ICC is not there yet, but this is what I'm going to leave with the comments. I've taken a lot from everybody who's trying to throw stones, just like a British colonially trained person who's looking at ways out not to be involved. Number one, we as the ICC should get like-minded people on a committee and work out the agenda that we want to follow to go into CARICOM and present it to CARICOM and say, this is what we have to be involved. I know it's the ministers and the prime ministers and so on, but we as an entity, the ICC. So how does the academics feel about that idea of mine? That's the million-dollar question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Jay. Let's get a response from Indira, please.
Is the question is how does the ICC engage CARICOM? Is that it?
How we can form ourselves into a group to present to CARICOM that we are an entity to be reckoned with. Not in fighting, but how we can be part and parcel of CARICOM. Because if CARICOM doesn't want us, we have to go there. And
now
put it on the table.
It depends on what you mean by part and parcel. CARICOMs have organs and it have institutions, right?
Yeah.
Those are concrete organs and institutions of CARICOM. And they're listed in the CARICOM website, what they are. However, the ICC is an NGO. Now, NGO now have a say in regional blocks. They do have a say in the meetings of regional blocks. So I think, I mean, I believe that ICC have already engaged CARICOM on certain issues. I believe that. And Dr. Mahabir can confirm, for example, reparations. So you write and you say that, you know, you have this concern, for example, with reparations, and that the Indians are left out. Indians would like to be part of this. If this is something, I'm just using reparations as an example. It's one of the more contentious issues. And then the question would arise there on the side is which Indians interested in this really? Is it this group, ICC, or is it the wider Indo-Caribbean population? And those kinds of things would go on in the debate and probably in the CARICOM meetings. Dr. Supnanan could probably expand because I have not been to CARICOM Summit. Dr. Raksing has been there, so they talked about you know, how they make policy. So how they make policies. So there is, we already have the organization. So we have the ICC. So the ICC is well established as an organization, Indo-Caribbean organization. And it is an interest group. It is an interest group, non-governmental organization, and NGOs do have a place in the whole system, in the international system. You know, so you have states, you have non-state actors, you have individuals, you have NGOs, you have IGOs, you have multinational corporations. They have standing in the international system. So they're recognized as players, they're recognized as important actors that could contribute to national, regional, and international policy. And so I think that the organization is already there. So ICC is already there. So it's now for ICC to engage the Secretariat, the CARICOM Secretariat. That's what I think. I don't know if you want further information. I'm not sure I'm in a position to respond. Thank you.
Thank you
May I
very much,
please,
Dr.
Mrs.
Supnanan.
Supnanan? Hello.
Yes, we're hearing you. Go ahead,
Yes,
please.
thank you. First of all, I see there is this misunderstanding about CARICOM and the CARICOM Secretariat. All of us are already part of CARICOM. So I think the question is, ICC wants to get access, I think, to the CARICOM Secretariat so that you can do some lobbying and see what can be done. Because if you want to meet, like, say, a ministerial council, or
Right.
you want to make a presentation to the heads of government,
Right.
you have to send in your request. And for your request, you need to have the regional recognition, which is very important.
Right.
You said, sir, you're coming from the labor movement. I know very well from those early years, I was a green lawyer at that time, that the labor CLO and so on, they had a place at the heads of government table. But before you do that, you need to do some work. You need to get the regional recognition. You know, no animosity among member states and so on, who wants and who doesn't want, and those types of things. Just like with the CARICOM Chamber of Commerce, etc. So you need to do that work first. Then you can start to liaise. And you need to have your head of government behind you, because that's also very important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, and he will need to talk to his colleagues and so on. So there's a lot behind the scenes that will go on. Because if people are not convinced, it's very difficult to get a seat at the heads of government table and to go there and give a presentation. So you need, you need your back support, your full support from your head of government. And it will start, you go to the secretariat, letters, it's a whole process. And I think you know it very well because you said yourself you're from the labor union. Okay? I don't want to prolong this, but talking about the CARIFESTA, why certain equipment and so on was not taken to Barbados and so on, there is also a cost of impact. And they're also dealing with size, how much do you have, and time allocation. So it's a lot that's going on behind the scenes before you can really go and do your presentation. Talking about Indo-Caribbean, I remember very well in Spain, we had Expo Zaragoza. And do you know it was the TNT, it was your country's reps who had Indo night there. all the efforts were made by your member state. So whenever it was possible, and people eat roti with their hands, I was one of them. Okay, because it was a dinner, and there was a lot of Indian food prepared by your members who were there in Spain. So a lot of Trinidadian Indo food and so on when you come to Curry Festa. So if we have to be very serious, if one wants to make a case, you really have to come with evidence, you have to come with statistics, because those things are very important. And from a very personal point of view, I mean, Dr. Harak Singh said a lot, but personally, I am a regionalist, okay? And I really would like to see a balanced approach. No one should be left behind. So whatever we do, we need to have a balanced approach. We need the support from everyone. And let me give you an example. Suriname has the portfolio for sport, youth, and gender within CARICOM. So it was under the previous President Venetian when CARICOM Youth Commission was established at the heads of government level. And you know what the irony was? There was no youth member in that commission. No youth member, only senior people. And when I talk about senior people, no disrespect, 60 and so on, with really well-recognized, distinguished people, but no youth. And it's a CARICOM Youth Commission. So my minister, myself, we said to our president, listen, what's going on? How can this thing be a youth commission? So the president had to say that, okay, we will come back, but hold on here, we do not agree to this. And this is how business is being conducted. So again, it is member state driven. So in the end, we had the youth in the commission. And the youth was from Suriname. It was the Suriname's youth ambassador who became a member of that commission. Because the president said, this cannot fly. This is not a youth commission. This is a commission of, and they will take decisions for the youth, but the youth itself is not there. So this is the way to approach it. And again, it is member state driven. It's very important to emphasize that. Same for agriculture. Guyana has the portfolio for agriculture. Guyana's Minister for Agriculture is Indo, as far as I know, as far for all these years. They're doing a lot for agriculture. But it doesn't mean that they were working for the Indo group. No, you're there working for everybody. Mention was made of sheep and cassava and so on in TNT. What I know is that there are a lot of, we call it small ruminants projects. Funding went to all the member states in these areas. There is a Caribbean or CARICOM Poultry Association. And as far as I know, somebody from TNT was the chair or is still the chair, right? So I think really there might be a misconception that the Indo-Caribbean people are not there. Maybe they're not being seen. Maybe there is not enough information going out there. Who is in what capacity and who is doing what? So maybe more should be done of those type of things. But it is there. The people are there. The people are working. The only thing is you cannot go there and work only for one group. You need to have a balanced approach. Because in the end, everybody listening, when you sit in the CARICOM Secretariat, contributions from all the member states, which means contributions, the salaries of everybody, right, goes to pay the salary of the Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary General, and so on. So you cannot make the distinction. Just like when you're a minister of agriculture, who is paying your salary? It's not only one group of society, it's everybody. You have an obligation, a constitutional obligation to work for everyone. So if a group has certain issues, specific issues, they should be heard. And it starts at the member state level. I cannot emphasize that enough. It starts at the member states level. Whatever you do, it's very important to make that statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
we want to make it clear as the ICC, Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, a legally registered body, that we are not advocating preference for Indians in the Caribbean. I want to emphasize that. We don't want any favors. We don't want any special treatment. We want equity, diversity, and inclusion. We want representation at every regional and national body that is representative of our population size in the Caribbean. Which I like Dr. Haraksik's point about that dichotomy between victimhood and agency. We have written CARICOM Secretariat many times, and not even an acknowledgement by email and hard copy letters, and by WhatsApp sometime. In fact, we have invited them to this program to speak. We do invite stakeholders at the very top whenever we have a program and a topic like this. They never come. So what do we do? What do we do? You write, you invite them, they don't even acknowledge. I think, based on experience, the only way is to take legal action. As Anand Ramlogan, our eminent Caribbean lawyer, has been doing. He's a constitutional lawyer. We have to write them legally, threatening discrimination with adequate evidence, and then I think they will respond. So I think we have Mohammed Keshavi, who has been waiting a long time now. So go ahead, sir, unmute.
I won't take much time, Kumar. I mean, a beautiful discussion, very open, very reflective, very analytical. I just make two small points, and I think Mr. Singh spoke so beautifully when he mentioned about the complexity of dealing with these issues. But I agree that we need to have more engagement, whichever way we can engage the processes of democratic institution or law, or whichever way of civil society getting involved, to ensuring that there is equity. There may not be equality, but there has to be fairness, because if the Caribbean society is going to be a pluralistic society, it is not a society of blacks, it's not a society of Indians, it's not a society of the other races. I think it's a society of the Caribbean present population. And if pluralism is something that we are committed to, then it has to be on the basis of fairness, equity, and justice. So I would endorse all the lovely things that have been said, but only to say that we need to go forward with some program. Thanks a lot, Kumar.
Okay. Thank you very much, MK. I want to bring on Dr. Arnold Thomas from St. Vincent. Go ahead, please. Dr. Thomas, can you unmute? One more time. You're still muted. Good.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Again, it's great listening to four presenters on issues that are of such importance to us in the Indo-Caribbean group. I want to just focus on one particular issue, and that is reparations. Currently, yours truly is involved with a team in writing the history of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And currently, I am writing this chapter on indentureship. And what I want to say is the more I read and study about indentureship, the more I'm convinced that indentureship was an extension of slavery. And having said that, when we come to talk of reparations, I cannot see how we can leave indentureship out of the reparations. And if there's going to be a reparations committee, which there is, the Indo-Caribbean people have to be represented, because indentureship, in my view, and more I'm convinced about that, indentureship is just another extension of, if you want to call it, white domination. it was what the whites in the Caribbean structured themselves to do, to have domination over all the other races, all the other groups in the Caribbean. So my point is this, let me reemphasize that. We have to see indentureship as an extension of a kind of slavery. And if we certainly believe that, and I certainly believe that, then we have to play a role and a part in what this reparations committee is doing. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Thomas, for that comment. Rosalind, you can go ahead and ask your question, please. Can you unmute?
Unmute, yeah. Okay, good evening, Shalima, and thank you for inviting me. I want to thank all the presenters. Very interesting presentations, very insightful. Dr. Harak Singh and Dr. Manu from Suriname. Yeah, but I was listening very intently, and I have been a practitioner because I was a former director of CARICOM, and I was also a diplomat for many years, over 30 years. So I've had the experience in CARICOM attending all some of these meetings, COFCO, COTED, and my personal view of CARICOM is that CARICOM still has a very long way to go. In fact, one of the things I've pursued while I was a diplomat, while I was in policy, is that we should have a culture desk in every ministry. Because I hear a lot of people asking, how could the ICC be represented? Of course, there's the United Nations where you could become a non-governmental member. There's certain avenues to be membership in the UNs where you could be an observer in some of the meetings. So that's a possible area that there can be some representation. But I think as you know, both Kusha, I think Kusha and I, we met several times. I don't know if he remembers me, but I was a former permanent secretary of Ministry of Trade. And I think in some of those meetings I was present. So he may not remember me. It was very, very for a short period, not very long. Because in fact, I only stayed at that level for about 5 years, and I wish I had stayed longer because, of course, I got to retire at 60. So I wish I could have stayed a little longer so that I could do a little more. But the thing is, what I find is that the need for agency, I think that point, and that is really what happens at the level of the ministries and the governments. For instance, I find at the end of each CARICOM meeting, we issue a communique and it addresses a number of things. And some of the things go on from year to year to year to year. There's nothing new. But the thing is, how do people get things on the agenda? I remember when people of the African descent, when they wanted Emancipation Day to become something represented by all the countries, and it is now a holiday, you know, Representative Samenja came to me, I was director of CARICOM, and they made a proposal of how we could now externalize this thing and make it, you know, recognized by other countries. And they used that forum to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But the thing is, there's no avenue where people, for instance, before CARICOM meeting, people know what the agenda is. We get an agenda, it's fixed by CARICOM. Then I will send out to all the ministries, give me a brief so I can prepare something with Prime Minister. And then we go and we represent that at the meeting. That's a policy. But it's not really reflective of what some of the real issues in each territory. And it's whatever the governments decide that they put in the agenda, what is important to them, that's what goes. Because, for instance, when I was in the UN, I was as a diplomat in the UN. And sometimes I used to be involved in climate change and in the second committee. And sometimes in some of these meetings, I would attend some of the very high level meetings on international security, on nuclear proliferation, all these things. And I would say, why am I sitting on this committee? How does this affect the people of Trinidad and Tobago, the people of Felicity, where I grew up and went to school? I say, how does that impact, you know, my people in my country? Only when I served on the second committee dealing with climate change, and now we see the effect of climate change. And that was over 20 years ago, and now we see how terrible it is. I said, this is an issue that I could really put my heart into, because this will affect Trinidad and Tobago, because we are a small island development state. We have all the problems of being a country that depend on one product, on oil and gas, that the other sectors still growing, whatever. So, and I felt, you know, I was able to make some input there. In fact, I was involved with the MDGs and the development of the Millennium Development Goals, because in 2000 we celebrated, you know, that 50th anniversary of the UN. And I was able to make a lot of contribution into what went into the MDGs. But now we have the SDGs. So, and we still haven't gone very far. I mean, because while we think that we underrepresented as an Indo group, the small islands are even more underrepresented, you know, in the international community. But I must say, for CARICOM, though, at the UN, we had this group, CARICOM group of member states, and we made an impact at the UN. Because in fact, to have the session of the General Assembly to deal with small island developing states, it was myself and Dr. Ash, who's now deceased, the ambassador of Antigua and Barbuda, who were able to negotiate with the United States and some of the larger countries to have that special session to address SIDS. Because they were saying, these are some countries, why don't want a summit? They could just have a conference. And I would say, no, we are 33 countries from the Pacific, from the Caribbean, and in the Indo-Pacific, we have Mauritius and some other islands, small islands. We should have a summit to have all heads of government of the 100, and at that time it was 190 something states. We want them to be there to hear our concerns. So the question of marginalization, it happens in territories as well as in the wider international community. But I would agree that that there needs to be more equitable representation. At least I've tried to do that. And I think it's because I had that kind of broad, growing up. I went to Felicity CM school, then I went to high school, a prestigious school in Port of Spain. So that and then I studied in Canada, I studied in Spain. So I had a wide understanding of my own self. And I think I brought that to me when I was a policymaker. But as I think Indira said, you need education, and I think that needs to start at the level of schools. I think people need to understand, even our society, there's still a lot of disintegration. People don't even understand what happens, in other communities. And that example that Indira brought up, recently I had
Rosalind?
to bring that, yeah.
Rosalind, thank you very much. Thank you very much. We have just a few minutes again. We've already gone over, and we have 2 people waiting to ask their questions. So we thank you very much for your contribution.
But education is key. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
I'd like to bring in Justice. It's okay. We understand. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We'd like to have Justice Dr. Anthony Kafour, please. Go ahead. Please unmute.
Sorry, yes. Thank you very much, Halima, and thank you all. Very, very stimulating discussion. So congratulations to ICC and, of course, all the panelists. 2 very short points. I've put it in the chat for ease of reference. One is that, in terms of the opportunity to make a greater contribution by the Indo-Caribbean community, my perspective, my view is that the mechanism for change has to be there, the mechanism for institutional change. And while I take Dr. Haraksing's point that, just because you place somebody of East Indian descent on certain bodies, such as the Reparation Committee, for example, or the RJLSC, doesn't mean that they will necessarily articulate that particular perspective. I think the question of perception is very important, as well as bringing maybe a cultural dimension to any deliberations that may be taken by these august bodies. My second point, very quickly, is that just taking up the question of the agency argument, it's somewhat reminiscent of what the famous JFK once said: ask not for what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I think that's a very valid point. But I also would like to add, with the greatest respect to Dr. Haraksing, that, if you look at the example of the way in which the African-American community was marginalized, they had to resort to constitutional actions. And of course, that was pioneered by Justice Thurgood Marshall, later Supreme Court judge, but also by actual non-violent protests, except that, of course, they suffered the consequence of tremendous violence. So is the panel, perhaps I'd be interested to know what the panel thinks as to whether, in terms of articulating the Indo-Caribbean point of view, some greater form of protest action, apart from writing and emailing and all that Dr. Kumar has mentioned, something more has to be done. I'll just leave it there in the interest of time. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kafour. And we will have our final question or comment from the person representing Caribbean Yard Campus. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, all. Good evening. My name is Roel Gibbons. I couldn't let the comments on CARIFESTA go by without making my own contribution. I was asked to be cultural director for CARIFESTA. The last time that CARIFESTA was held in Guyana, I think that was it might have been 2012. I'm not sure about the year. But at that time, I'm an Afro, as you can see, I'm of Afro-Caribbean descent. Okay. At that time, I made the decision that Ram Leela, as part of our heritage, a part that we should be very proud about, must be included in CARIFESTA. And it was. But what was interesting is that the director of culture at the time, who was a Hindu, raised questions about it, about inclusion of Ram Leela. In fact, no one had thought that Ram Leela at that time should be included in CARIFESTA. But you know, my own background is that I taught at the University of the West Indies, and I taught Ram Leela as part of my curriculum. I taught Huse, that was part of my curriculum, and I taught indigenous ceremonies as well as I taught Orisha as part of my curriculum. So I am making an argument for two things here. One is the need not only for agency, but for intercultural education, right? And that has got to be done across the board. I'm also making the argument for trans-ethnic collaborations and activism on certain things. There are certain issues in the Caribbean, issues of discrimination, issues of injustice. I also wrote, just like Noor Kumar, I also wrote CARICOM several times on Haiti, on the issue of Haiti years ago, and got no response. But there are issues of discrimination, issues of inclusion and so on that we all face in the Caribbean, right? And we've got to recognize that. And I think that we've got to open our forum, okay, for trans-ethnic, once people are conscious, trans-ethnic representation in those cases. Okay, those are the 2 points I want to make. I don't want to take up any more time, all right?
Excellent. Thank you very much. Ashok, can you please respond? This will be your closing comment as well.
Well, I think we have to approach it from a point of view of CARICOM being a regional bureaucracy, and the representation of the membership is the head of state of each one of these countries. So you have to find the incentive for the head of state to carry that agenda forward. And regardless of what you might want to do with CARICOM itself, the head of state of the respective governments are the members who have to take that agenda forward. So the bureaucracy does not have the wherewithal to respond conveniently to each and individual request. It has to be taken up with the head of state of each country. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Dr. Harak Singh, would you like to make a closing comment?
Thanks very much, Shalima. I don't think there's anything I can usefully add. I followed all the questions, and some of them are very incisive. I understand from what's going on, though, that it appears that the ICC has an agenda. It has a program, I suppose, of what it wants to do. And I can only say good luck to them. There are many, many NGOs, so to speak, that have found ways of finding space. And indeed, from what I know, in a lot of the agreements and trade treaties and so on that CARICOM has signed, there is a recognition, strong recognition actually, that space must be given to NGOs. That's part of the Cotonou Agreement, it's part of the EPA. So there is room. It's now for the NGOs to find ways to maneuver into that room. So thank you very much.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. Dr. Suknandan, would you like to make a closing comment?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, I very much agree with what Dr. Harak Singh said. And the concerns and what I heard about CARICOM Secretariat, I'm not there anymore, but may I ask that you write to the cultural desk and not to the Secretary General and so on. So you directly write, and please have maybe a support letter from your ministry responsible for culture, right? And that's how you continue with that. That's what, and again, it's a proof what the last speaker said about Ram Leela, and the director was of the opinion it's within the member state. It's not at the regional level. The decision is taken within the member state. So you need to get the support within the member states, and from there you go to regional. And you will have a regional voice. You will be heard, but you need to do some work. That's all what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Dr. Rampasad, final word?
Well, I have more than one point, so I hope I can do it very quickly, Shalima. I know we want to close. So someone, I think it's Rosalind, mentioned about representation not taking place effectively at CARICOM. It doesn't take place at national level either. So you elect, we know how local politics go. You elect someone, and it doesn't mean that you're going to get representation, adequate representation, even at the constituency or at the national level, even if the constituency representative is of your ethnic ilk. So that's one point I want to make. With regard to Justice Gafoor's question and protests, well, one minister said they ain't protest yet, so therefore they can continue to increase the price of fuel. But what protest movements do, they bring visibility to a cause. And more media you can get, the better, like the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter or something like that. Yeah, all of those things, it depends on how catchy it is and how much people you can mobilize. That is very, very important. I would still like an answer to how the agenda of CARICOM had changed, though, because we see change in Trinidad with regard to reparations in excluding indentured laborers, indentureship, I should say, excluding indentureship. And it's also in the CARICOM 10-point plan now, but indentureship was there before. So how did it change? Was it a lobby from the state in Trinidad, Guyana, Suriname, these countries with Indian populations? I think that is something we would want to get to the root of, how that agenda changed. And I want to commend the ICC and Dr. Kumar for raising these issues at the CARICOM Secretariat level. And we need to continue doing so. But we need to continue doing so robustly. So one of the challenges we face is mobilizing the population. And it doesn't have to be Indians. The last speaker mentioned the trans-ethnic movements. And there are many movements that have been trans-ethnic in the past, including labor in particular, where both Indians and Africans fought together. So if we can, even if we don't identify with each other's cause, but we can see merit in it, if we can support them and move forward. So we need to move forward one way or the other. That's for sure. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you so very much. To all of our speakers, we've had an excellent conversation today, and this gives us an impetus to move forward. At this point in time, we can say thank you so much, and we will get in touch with you all going forward. So let me turn you all over to Shakira now.
Thank you, Shalima, and thank you to all our speakers for their sacrifice and for giving freely of their time, your experience, your knowledge, and your expertise. As we've said earlier, this public meeting is being hosted by the Indo-Caribbean Cultural Center, and today we have been pleased to have been supported by the Indian Diaspora Council, led by Ashok Ram Saran. And you can feel free to contact the ICC to publish your books. And remember that we are asking for you to give us your suggestions and donations, and you can contact Dr. Mahabir for details. Our topic next Sunday will be Youth Maintaining Culture in the Indian Diaspora. So please visit, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and to see all our past recordings. I am Shakira Mohammed from Trinidad and Tobago saying goodbye. May God bless you all. Dhanyabad.